trying to get all of my talking points into something that I can like flip through, because right now it's one giant document that I know I won't be able to read on stage. So I'm trying to make like note cards, maybe.
So not necessarily preparing at the last minute.
I mean, it's tomorrow, so it's not the last minute.
So we're traveling on Thursday, and we're able to do all of this stuff. Post a video, get all of the posts, get everybody notified from the van.
And now I'm answering comments.
And now, there you go. From the road.
From the road.
And so now it's like, if my transaction
is a new beginning, and it's really important to remember that. Like, I honestly have to remember that.
First you can change it. So let's start using SketchUp.
So I'm Bob. I'm not going to assume that everybody knows who I am. So my name's Bob. I run a channel and a company called I Like to Make Stuff. Basically, I make whatever I feel like making for a living, and I show people how I do it. And that's the best job in the world. At this point, I have a team, a small team, which is awesome. Josh right here is my first full-time employee, friend. I mean, I have full-time friends, but he's also a friend. He runs camera and does a bunch of like just making this stuff happen now. I've also had an editor that I've been working with part-time for almost 3 years now, I think, and he's a good friend. He's also a designer that he did my logo, he does all my design work. And so the point of saying that is I've been doing this for a while, but not by myself. There's a lot that goes into this to do it full-time, and I take advantage of people who are better at certain parts of it than I am to help me make the whole thing happen. I'm going to go ahead and spoil the rest of the talk right now. The main takeaway is that you should be tailoring your content to fit the platform. That's a huge, like, write that down. Not all platforms are the same. Even video platforms. Not all video platforms are the same. They don't have the same audience. They don't have the same reasoning. They don't have the same infrastructure. So you should be tailoring what you're doing to the medium that you're using to put it out there. And by doing that, that means that not all of you, as a human, as a person, is going to make it into all of your content. What are some parts of you, as a person, as a creator, that are not getting out into the world? And this is a big thing. I think it's really important to think, what are the things that I'm interested in, that I'm really good at, that don't necessarily fit into what I do on a regular basis, your core content type. That will help you understand whether the other stuff is worthwhile, whether doing podcasts or whether doing books or whatever is worthwhile. So you have a list of things like, these are the parts of me that I don't get to share that I want to share. How do I do that? And then once you have that list, the next thing is figuring out which vehicle is best to get those things out into the world. For myself, weekly videos is really my core piece of content. I have two big goals in doing those videos. The first one is to, in all things, bring value. No matter what I'm doing, no matter what the medium is, no matter what the point of it is, it has to be valuable. And that is a vetting point for a lot of my ideas, because we can be super narcissistic and super egotistical and think that, like, oh, I like this and I'm gonna put it out in the world. But if it doesn't have any value, like, what is that doing? What's the point of that? The second thing with those videos is, and with all the stuff in general, is to build community. With the videos and with the comment section and with all the stuff that surrounds my core content, a big part of that is building community and giving everybody who's involved in this community a safe and productive place to be together and to share their ideas and to learn new ideas and all that stuff. So it's not just about putting out videos and being like, there's a thing, world. You know, it's about putting it out there and then fostering the conversation around that thing. With those two goals in mind, I specifically make them to be really concise. So I'll shoot a project, start to finish, and then we do the edit first. So we cut it down, we cut down all the fat. And then I go back, and once we get the edit really tight, I do voiceover to the edit. And that forces me to speak like as concisely as possible about what I'm doing. You gotta nail it. You gotta say what you can as quickly as possible. Part of doing that process means that there's a whole bunch of me a whole bunch of that project and the idea behind that project and the stuff around that project that never gets included in the video because it's extra. All of these other things are ways for you to take that extra stuff, your reasonings, your ideas, and get that stuff out there in a different format. But in the project videos, I don't get to tell people why function is more important than form to me, because that's not really relevant to like how to make a table or whatever. But it's important to me as a maker. And it would be important to some people to hear that, but it doesn't make sense in that context. There are some things that just don't translate to video no matter how important they are, like brainstorming. Brainstorming is one of the coolest things I've seen come out of doing a weekly live stream. And it was like an hour and a half of, I don't know, 80 people or something brainstorming together about how to make modular work tables. Give me some ideas that I can integrate into my idea, and then I'm gonna make a video and put it out on YouTube, and it's gonna be all of our stuff together. And that was huge. It was really important for me to do that. And it's a real-time conversation with people who are like super passionate about what you do. So I live stream on Twitch. Some people do it on YouTube. But I chose Twitch for a few reasons, but one of them is because it's a huge platform, video platform, that is not entirely, but almost an entirely different group of people than what's on YouTube. There is a huge culture difference on this site versus this site. There's a huge difference in the actual people. And by doing project videos over here and doing live streams over here, I'm connecting with a whole different group of people that I wouldn't have been able to talk to otherwise. At the same time, I'm having a conversation with them. Like we're interacting, it's real time, and it's not necessarily about them watching me build something to learn it. It's more like them getting to come to my shop and hang out and us getting to talk while I'm working. All right, so the next thing is book writing, and I'm very new to this. I have a book, wrote a book, right here. Thank you. Forcing myself to write a book about something brought details about me that I probably wouldn't have had any occasion to share otherwise. And it's been really interesting hearing the feedback on that part of the book specifically, because a lot of people identify with like, oh, I did that when I was a kid too. Like I always thought I was a weirdo because I had a aluminum foil ball from Pee Wee Herman. I'm like, no, I did that too. Writing in that way gave me a lot of opportunity to explain the whys of stuff at length. I was just able to like just kind of brain dump on all of this stuff around what I do every day that I can't ever get out otherwise. It also forced me to take stock of myself. I had to step out of this very moment and actually think about who I am a little bit and like what's changed over the last couple of years. You start to forget about like how amazing it is that things are like they are right now. By writing all that down, I was just like, what? Like, this is crazy. I mean, my life is crazy, awesome. And I get so caught up in like just the let's work that you kind of forget about that. Podcasts, which is kind of the point of this whole thing, I think are really, really fantastic. Probably one of the best kind of sister mediums to video. For all of the stuff that you can't talk about or you can't get through in video, a podcast is a fantastic way to be able to do all that stuff. So David and Jimmy are my podcast mates, and we have a lot in common. There's a huge crossover in who we are, but we also have a lot of stuff that is not in common, that we are polar opposites about in our execution of stuff, in just our priorities and our lifestyles and just the place in life we are. There's a bunch of stuff that's different. That difference, I think, is what really makes a podcast worthwhile. Because I could get on, like I'm doing right now, I could get on here and talk about my own experience, and that is one point of view, and I only have this amount of experience to give you guys. But Jimmy has a whole different set. David has a whole different set. And when we get a chance on a weekly basis, we're forced, it sounds bad, but we're forced to sit down and talk. All of those differences are what make that time really useful. I think we have a good rhythm. I think we're good friends and we work together really well. Different people have different dynamics on their show. But it's a good stretching to have to talk to those people every week for that reason. But also having to come up with something to talk about every week is so much harder than you would expect. So when we got started, we didn't tell anybody we were going to do the show. And we were like, well, let's just do one. And if it's awful, no one will ever know it happened. And we all agreed on that. Like, nobody's going to hear about this if it doesn't work. And so that took a little bit of the pressure off. It's not like we went out and publicly said like, all right guys, we're starting a podcast next week and it's gonna be awesome and you can get on board now or whatever. We made sure that it wasn't gonna like go down in flames before we said anything about it. And that took a little bit of the pressure off. Like I said, having to come up with something to talk about every week with the same people, it does become difficult over time. And how you keep the conversation moving. Sometimes when you have 3 people, or there are podcasts with 4 or 5 people, sometimes some of those people are just not into it and they're tired and they just don't want to they're just there. But to have a good show, you have to keep that conversation rolling. So you have to figure out some ways to just constantly being like, okay, yeah, and what's next? If something stalls, you got to be there and be attentive enough to like keep the thing moving. Otherwise, the show will get boring and it'll get stale, and you won't be motivated, and people won't be motivated to listen, and it'll probably fall away. Picking people to do a podcast with is not just people you like, or not just people you have conversation or you have stuff in common with, but finding people that can carry the load of that transition and of keeping the conversation going. So another thing is live speaking. Live speaking, like this, is an entirely different thing. You would think live and podcasting are kind of similar. They're not. Because you guys are not responding at all to this, right? So I'm just trying to move through, I've got some talking points, I'm just trying to move through. In a podcast, at least, I'm talking to other people who are responding, and it's like you guys are here and we're over here having this conversation, and I don't really have to think about the fact that you're not responding. So it's live, but it's a very different thing. Live speaking can be done a bunch of different ways depending on your personality. You can super rehearse it. Like, I know Adam Savage has talked considerably about how he'll take a talk and he'll do that talk so many times that it iterates. Every time he does one, he has his beats he tries to hit throughout it, and he'll find where a beat doesn't quite work, and so he'll go back and change that one section, and the next time he does it, he's modifying the structure through experience. You can be like me, who types out a quick outline and then just kind of wings it and hopes that it doesn't bomb. And even this same talk tomorrow will be considerably different, because as I'm doing this, I'm learning well, this thing's not really as important. I said this part twice, it needs to adjust. So part of it is the experience of doing live anything and taking stock of it, changing how you do it the next time. Those are the 4 kind of big things that I'm involved in. And like I said before, there's tons of other media types that you can get into. There's tons of other ways to get those parts out. But the point of I think the main point of all these other things is to be able to get all of you out, even when your main content type can't encapsulate all of you.
I don't know, I'm simultaneously thirsty and game all the time.
So I wrote up a quick list of some of the income sources that can come with each one of these types. This may be helpful for you to decide whether they're worthwhile for you. So live streaming, and this is kind of talking about Twitch and YouTube and Instagram. There's ad revenue, which is always good. I mean, that's going to be really similar, maybe a little bit below what a normal YouTube video would be. You're probably going to have lower viewership on live than you would on a regular video, so the ad revenue will be lower. Donations are a big thing during a live stream. People can go to Twitch and they buy these things called bits. It's like a kind of in-website currency. So they buy them in bulk. They buy them by 100 or something. And then they can give those to the streamers that they want. And so when they're watching you stream, they can cheer, and they go cheer 100, and you get 100 of these bits. Each one of those is worth a certain amount of money. So you get paid out at the end of the month based on how much people cheer. But there's a lot of income streams around live streaming that you may not expect. The podcast has similar streams of income. Sponsors obviously are really useful on some podcasts. We don't personally do sponsors on our show because we have a really awesome Patreon support for our show, and it's more than enough to cover the cost, which is relatively low for a podcast. It's enough for us to feel like we're getting enough money for that time that we're spending doing it. All 3 of us are busy, so every week we have to set aside 2.5 hours in the morning, first thing in the week, to do the podcast. And so we walk away from that time feeling like that was valuable to the business because we've got enough money coming in from Patreon. Sponsorships didn't do that, so we leaned on Patreon for our podcast. But in our case, we have a separate Patreon for the podcast because it's the three of us, and then we all have one individually. And that's another thing to think about. Like, it's easy to have one Patreon system for everything that you do, but in certain cases, it may make sense to separate those out because somebody may want to support one thing but not necessarily care so much about the other. And that's kind of a fine line, but keep that as a consideration. You can have multiple Patreon accounts for different things that you do. They have different value, different rewards. There's a bunch of options there. Merch is another good thing. Podcasts, people love making a t-shirt right there. People love t-shirts, people love stickers, and creating merch is relatively simple. And it's kind of like the Patreon thing. I could just talk about I like to make stuff merch on the podcast, or we could create a whole different set of making it merch and sell it that way. It's almost like double dipping. You know, you have more product, more people are going to buy that stuff. So for books, the income sources are obviously sales. It's not that much. I mean, I'm self-published. I'm not published through a big publishing company, so I didn't get an advance or anything like that. But the investment to self-publishing is basically zero. So anything that I make is profit, and it's not a lot, but it is just some sales. There's sales for the print books, and just to give you an idea, I publish through Amazon, so I put up the Kindle version, and then from that, I also, in the same interface, I uploaded a paperback version. They print these on demand, and these cost about $2 to print, and I'm selling them for $10. So, I mean, that's a pretty good margin for something that I didn't have to invest any money into getting these printed. I'm not sitting on a inventory or anything like that. But so you do get some from that. Audiobooks, another digital thing, that you can sell. And I'm just finishing my audio version now, so I'm not really sure how it's going to perform. Live appearances, there is some money, maybe not a ton, money to be had for, being paid to speak. Travel costs and all that stuff is usually included in those things. But the more you do, the more experience you have talking live, the more you can take that number up and you can ask for more and more. Another way to do it, even if like the event isn't willing to pay for you to speak, you can often get sponsorship for the trip through another company. So I know that there's some people who have like gone to Maker Faire as like ambassadors of 3D printing companies or something like that. And so that's another way to be able to take advantage of the live speaking, but actually be paid by kind of a third party. So if you have an event that you want to go to, you have an opportunity to speak or to demo something, but you can't afford it, and the event is not willing to pay you, look for another sponsor to fund the trip, and maybe even pay you to be a representative of them along the way. That's a pretty good crossover. All right, so why do any of this stuff? What's the point? I talked about a lot of stuff, and if you were to try to do all of it, you're going to spread yourself too thin. You're going to burn out. And there's a worry, at least for me, that doing too much stuff, I'll kind of become a master of none and not be good at any of it, but just do a lot of stuff. And that is a really good definition of me, so I'm okay with that. But it's something to think about when you're looking at all of these options as things that you can do. Are they worthwhile? Are they actually going to help you, or are you just spreading yourself out and trying to add things all the time? My advice there would be don't try all of these at once, or maybe don't try all of them ever. Not everything is for everyone, and not every one of these things is going to work for every person. I mean, so I've worked for myself more of my life than I've worked for other people. And so I don't know that I'll necessarily be doing all of the things that I'm doing right now for 25 years, but I think it's already changed from what I thought I was going to be doing to what I'm doing now, and I think that'll probably continue. And as digital stuff continues to change, like we'll probably all be chasing the new thing and the new opportunity and stuff. So I don't know, though. I think about that. If I get burnt out, I just try to do something entirely different. go run or go outside or write the day. And I don't do that too often, not as often as I should probably, but I just try to write off the day and go be happy, with the kids or something. That seems to work. You guys are awesome. Thank you.